State funeral service of Queen Elizabeth II takes place at Westminster Abbey today. It will be attended by world leaders who have already descended on London to bid farewell to the Queen. These include the heads of state from across Europe, Asia, Africa and the United States. The 96-year-old has been lying in state at Westminster Hall. This is since Wednesday to allow Londoners to pay their respects. She died earlier this month, triggering, I should say, a 10-day mourning period in the United Kingdom. Joining us now for this conversation is Dr. Sean Lang, Senior Lecturer in History at the Anglia Ruskin University. Doc, very good morning to you and thank you very much for making time for us on this important day. Perhaps let me begin the conversation by asking, what do you think is the legacy that Queen Elizabeth II leaves behind for the United Kingdom?
That's a big question, but actually I think it can be brought down to one word, which is goodwill. I think that's really been the sort of theme of the, just over a week now since she passed on. A lot of goodwill sort of wished by people from within the United Kingdom and from around the world, but also a sort of discovery, if you like, of a depth of feeling towards her that perhaps has surprised not just people watching, but even the people sort of expressing it. A great sense of appreciation, a great sort of sense of respect for her very, very strong sense of duty and the sort of influence that she had of calm, of bringing people together, of course, embodying both her own kingdom, the United Kingdom, and her other kingdoms, and the Commonwealth as a whole. Mm-hmm. So I think all of that sort of built up to a very, very strong and very marked feeling of goodwill, obviously, that she had for others, but perhaps more importantly, that so many others had for her.
I can't help, Dr. Lang, but notice the language being used, particularly when I watch our international counterparts, when it comes to the future of a unified, united kingdom. And I have in mind countries like Northern Ireland, the people of Scotland. There's much talk about Scottish independence. Ireland, that conversation has long been in the making. And so, what does the future hold for a unified United Kingdom?
Oh, if I could tell you that, I'd be paid a lot more than I am. But what has been very marked with the King, for example, in his first few days of his reign, is that he has been to visit all the parts of the United Kingdom. Obviously, he's been in England, he went to Scotland, he went to Northern Ireland, and he went to Wales. And in each case, he was sort of presenting himself, if you like, as the new king, giving a very high priority to that issue of his role in relation to them. Now, the question of their future is a political one. That's for the politicians. And the monarch will go along with whatever is decided, regardless of his personal views, or indeed, in the case of the Queen, of her personal views.
Yeah.
But the role of the monarch is, if you like, to oversee and to facilitate any transition that might be made. And, of course, the same applies within the Commonwealth. Interestingly, the Scottish nationalists, the First Minister of Scotland from the Scottish Nationalist Party, Nicola Sturgeon, has said that her vision, of course, of an independent Scotland would include continuing to have the monarch as the King of Scots. So the monarchy's role is different from that of the politicians, but it will be there to, as I say, to sort of smooth the way for whatever political decisions might be taken at that lower level.
Of the two countries that I mentioned, Dr. Lang, the sentiment there, and I'm using these words because it is what the people on the ground have been saying. I'm not saying it's the majority of people, but it's some people, especially the ones who are arguing for independence from the British monarchy, and that is that the feeling towards the British monarchy is that of being polarized. Do you agree with that characterization?
There are certainly people who feel that, and there always will be. because there'll always be people, not least because of the history, who associate monarchy with the period of colonialism and imperial rule and so on. And that's inevitable, because obviously colonial rule meant in bringing in crown rule. And back in Victorian times, when a colony was created, it became under the crown. So there's an association which you can't really get away from. But I think that's where the personality of the monarch becomes very important. And Ireland provides, I suppose, the best example in that the violence of the period of the Troubles in the 1970s and the 1980s made the issue that much more emotive. And moreover, of course, it touched the royal family directly with the assassination of Lord Mountbatten. So when the Queen undertook her state visit to Ireland, to the Republic of Ireland in 2011, it was the first time a British monarch had been to Ireland since independence, and there'd been a lot of very bitter feeling towards the Crown, and there were people even then who were protesting. But the reconciliation that she effected was all the more powerful because of her personal losses in her family from it during the conflict. And so I think that was a symbol, and a very powerful symbol, of the role that the Crown can play in order to sort of mend relations, even after the break has been made, because obviously that's the Republic of Ireland rather than Northern Ireland. Now, interestingly, in Northern Ireland, I was hearing just this morning that the sentiment between the two communities is, among the Unionists, that is to say the Protestant community, not surprisingly, a very strong sense of loss and respect and what have you towards the death of the Queen. But also among the nationalists, that is to say the Sinn Féin political leadership, but also the nationalist Catholic community, not recognising the Crown as their monarch, because many of them, of course, want to be part of the Republic of Ireland, but immense respect for the person of the Queen. So sort of separating, if you like, the person from the office. Obviously, it'll be the challenge for the new king to try to maintain that goodwill. But it is quite a tribute, I think, to the political skill that the late Queen showed, that she's able to have that level of respect in Ireland where one simply wouldn't have expected it not that long ago.
Yeah. We're going to talk in a moment, Doctor, about the British relationship with the countries in Africa which fell under British rule. But I want to conclude this. You talk about the role of King Charles III as he ascends to the throne. And so the question is, amid this air of uncertainty about whether or not the United Kingdom will remain united, do you think the role of King Charles III will be that of promoting this unionism, or is it perhaps going to be something completely different?
Well, he has to be careful constitutionally, because we have this strange situation, of course, where the monarch is not really supposed to give any political view whatsoever. And, of course, up until now, as Prince, he's been giving his views on a range of issues, notably, of course, things like the climate and the environment and education. And all of that has to, basically it has to stop. It has to go through other voices. So he won't be in a position where he can issue an opinion about the future of the Union, even if I think we can be fairly sure that he does have them. But as for the future, again, very like the sort of independence of members of former colonies and the future of the Commonwealth, his role is to supervise, is to be the symbol, and above all, I suppose, the sort of final seal of approval for whatever it is that the people decide. I mean, obviously, if there are referenda, then, in a sense, he gives his blessing to whatever the decision has been. So it's not a deciding role. It's very much that symbolic but important role of accepting and therefore enabling people to, us all to move on from whatever that decision might be. I know it sounds a little bit vague the way I'm describing it, but it's not vague when it happens. And obviously we'll have to see what happens, but the decisions will be made, at a political level, and of course very much involving the people. Yeah.
Let's talk then about Britain's relationship with the countries of Africa that were under British rule in the age of colonialism. There is this talk here that perhaps something akin to what we saw in Germany, where there were reparations, something akin to that for the British people to really make amends with what has been a legacy that continues to define how some of the people here feel about the British monarchy? Your thoughts on that?
This is a complex one, and obviously this is about the legacy of the history. It's one which certainly will involve monarchy, although the main area of discussion obviously will have to be at a political level. And of course there are there are particular symbols. One thinks, for example, of the Benin bronzes in the British Museum, and a lot of talk about repatriating them. And there's been quite a lot of initiative taken at local level with individual. I'm thinking I'm in Cambridge, and there's Jesus College, Cambridge has returned a sort of metal cockerel to Nigeria. So I think this process is already underway. Now, obviously, there's a difference. I mean, they're two sides of the same sort of coin. But on the one hand, you've got the return of objects, and the other, reparations, which is presumably some sort of either financial package or some sort of payment in kind, as it were. And that's one which I think the debate is well underway. I think what we can say there. It's not a simplistic one, because obviously it involves how one looks at the past, and it looks at from different points of view. But what it's really about is that sort of looking forward to the future. So there may very well be, in fact I'd be surprised if there weren't, some sort of arrangements. Possibly, indeed, this can be done under the auspices of the Commonwealth, where obviously there's a very extensive African involvement and membership. But I don't know that it'll be a straightforward case of sort of saying this is a bill, you must pay it. It's more likely to be in the form of collaboration, cooperation, economic aid, and indeed some. Well, I could say symbolic. I'm not reducing the importance, but that sort of return of particular objects, artifacts, because in a sense you have to have reconciliation in order to move on. But as of course South Africa really showed the world, that can only be done by facing up honestly to the full complexity of the past. And one thing as a history lecturer, you certainly learn and put to your students is that the past will always defy a very simple reading. There's always it's always more complex than we might wish it. And so you need to face that in order to move forward. I think that process is underway, and I'm sure it will continue.
Yeah, on the back of that very sentiment then, Dr. Lang, I know it's going to be a bit of a complex question, but how does modern Britain relate to the countries of Africa, which are themselves modernizing, on the very issue that you talk about, that this issue of reparations or the return of objects? How do these two relate then?
I think there's a real problem not just in Britain, I think it's across the Western world in terms of the image of Africa. Because you mentioned the word modernising. Now, I know what you're talking about, but a lot of people, a huge area, part I think of the population, wouldn't quite understand that, because our image of Africa is so dominated by images from the news, and it's almost always a rural image. We simply don't have a sort of instinctive understanding of, the urban culture of Africa, and as you say, the modern culture of Africa. So I think there's a massive job to do in terms of understanding, in terms of sort of recognising, getting away from stereotypes, getting away from the familiar image because the familiar image obviously emphasises a difference between Africa and other parts of the world, and that really does need to change. That's quite a big cultural change that needs to take place, but I think it is part of this recalibrating of the relationship between the Western world and Africa, of which the colonial issue that you mentioned is an important part, but only part. So yes, I would imagine this has got to take place on a number of different fronts, and it's got really to have as its basis an understanding in the Western, well, as I say, in the European world, in the North American world, of the need for it. And I'm not sure that many people who are not experts in Africa or have particular direct links with Africa really appreciate that there is a problem in the first place. So I think you put your finger on a very real problem. If you ask what is the relationship between Britain and Africa, unless you're actually talking to people of African heritage or African family links. I think people wouldn't quite understand what you were asking about. And I think that's the problem. So the old colonial idea of, if you like, the sort of white saviour complex, I think it's still very much there, and it'll take time to change that, but it needs to come through much more greater understanding of the complexity and, above all, the change that has taken place in Africa.
Dr. Sean Lang, Senior Lecturer in History at the University of Anglia, Ruskin. Thank you very much for explaining
You're very welcome.
that
Thank
to
you.
us so well.